Hi there, my name is Dan Brace, and in this IBM i2 product support video, I'll be showing you an example upgrade and migration path for our newly released IBM i2 Ibase version 9. The intent of this guide is to cover the scenarios where you're either upgrading, migrating, or perhaps installing Ibase 9 for the first time. Before we get started, however, there are a few things that we should note about this guide. Here's a list of some of the things which we will be covering. We will be giving you an example of upgrades, installations, and migrations to version 9. We will be showing you the basics of Microsoft SQL Server backup and restores functionality, with more details on this later, and we'll be showing you Search 360 and alerting configurations. We'll also be showing you what to do in the scenario where your new install server is unable to talk to your old one to authenticate your security file. Let's talk about some of the stuff that we won't be covering in this video. Although we are going to be covering the basics of how to migrate a database, it's important to note that we will not be going in depth into the how-tos of SQL Server that may be associated with your environment. For example, we won't be covering backup strategies to employ after you've installed Ibase. This sort of information will be left up to your SQL Server DBA for you to work with. We're also not going to be able to cover all permutations of every single upgrade scenario in this video. For this video, we're going to cover on the most common scenario that we've seen in the field, which is where we have users with the previous latest version of i2 Ibase, which was 8.9.13. If you do need assistance with upgrading from a previous version of Ibase, then please see the channel for our related video where we hosted an i2 open mic covering upgrading to Ibase 8.9.11. We'll also not be covering how to configure single sign-on, or what specific file permissions you'll need to have set up, or what networking configuration you should use. The documentation found in our Knowledge Center is available for those answers to these sorts of questions, or alternatively you can always raise a case with our IBM i2 product support team for additional guidance. Lastly, we will not be covering the installation of other i2 products along with the Ibase 9 installation, for example Analyst Notebook. It is important, however, at this point to note that Ibase 9 at this release is only compatible with Analyst Notebook and Analyst Notebook Premium version 9.2.2. You must upgrade your version of Analyst Notebook to version 9.2.2 in order to work successfully with Ibase 9. Now let's talk about the example environment we'll be showing here. We will be using the following operating systems and Ibase versions. We will be using Windows Server 2016, running Ibase 8.9.13, running on SQL Server 2016 as our starting point. It's important to note at this point the database version of Ibase must be 8.9.13 before you can upgrade to Ibase 9. This will be covered in more detail later. For our example, we will be upgrading and migrating a small, purpose-built database which is deployed with some of the features most used by our clients, namely an upsized database with an upsized security file with Search 360 configured to not only find objects within your database but also PDFs and their contents indexed as well. It also has alerting configured. We will be upgrading in place, but we will also then be showing moving our database from one destination to another. Our end destination will be running Windows Server 2019 with Ibase 9 installed and running on SQL Server 2019. The IDS and IDB files that we will be using here are located on a network share. This is accessible by both the old server and the new server. To make things easier, and because it also largely reflects the setup most of our clients have, these will not be moving. One of the most important points to make at this stage is the importance of A, carrying out the work when there are not users in the database relying on the ability to use the product to do their jobs, and B, the importance of taking backups of all the relevant files before attempting the upgrade, including, for example, the IDS and the IDB file, as well as your SQL backups. Lastly, please note that a previous version of this guide can be found once again on our YouTube channel, so if you are using an older version of the product, that guide will be very helpful in getting your deployment of Ibase to version 8.9.13, which is required before installing Ibase 9. On that note, let's talk about that briefly now. If you're installing Ibase 9 for the first time, and you don't have an existing database, then the following information is not relevant to you, and you can skip ahead to the instructions on installing Ibase 9 onto the system. For those of you who do have an existing Ibase environment, however, it's important to note that the prerequisite step before installing Ibase 9 is to upgrade your database to version 8.9.13. The instructions found in our previous video can be used to upgrade to Ibase 8.9.13. It actually only covers going up to Ibase 8.9.11, but the only real change that you must make before you go to 8.9.13 is that you must now also install the SQL Server native client QFE as a prerequisite before Ibase 8.9.13 can be installed. Once the Ibase installation has been upgraded to version 8.9.13, you must then open your database or databases in Ibase Designer, which will then upgrade your backend database to be a version 8.9.13 database. You do not have to upgrade every client instance of Ibase user to version 8.9.13. So, for example, if you were currently running Ibase 8.9.11 and wanted to migrate to Ibase 9, your first steps would be to upgrade your Ibase installation, specifically in the location where you use Ibase Designer, to version 8.9.13. You would then open the databases that you use in Ibase 8.9.13 Designer. Then, once you've got there, you simply need to follow the rest of this guide to install Ibase 9 for all of your clients, both Ibase User and Designer. With all that said, let's take a quick look at our example database we'll be using in this guide. As you can see, this is a very simple database which has been configured to use both alerting, our Search 360 technology, and has only a few simple data structures within it. I have a simple alert configured and also some sample files have been added to the database, such as PDFs which are appropriately indexed using the Adobe 9 iFilter. The database is upsized to SQL Server as is its security file, and here you can also see that the backend database version is currently a version 8.1 database. As a note, if you're worried about migrating your production database, we would recommend creating a new simple database like the one that I've created here and migrating that first before working in production. That way, you can familiarize yourself with these upgrade tasks before committing them. First of all, let's have a look at the upgrade process which we require to move to Ibase 9. In this example, once again, we're running SQL Server 2016 on Windows Server 2016. Both of these versions of the Microsoft software are supported for use on both Ibase 8.9.13 and version 9. So our first step is to perform an in-place upgrade regardless of whether you're going to be migrating afterwards. For these steps, I will be working on the main server where my Ibase database is hosted. For most of our clients, this is going to be the same location as the SQL Server, but the most important thing to note is these initial steps will be performed with a location that my Ibase Designer installation is hosted. Upgrading the clients is broadly similar, but there are steps we must take in Ibase Designer first before we roll out Ibase 9 to our wider users. To do so, first, you must uninstall Ibase 8.9.13. Upgrading directly to Ibase 9 with Ibase 8.9.13 or any previous version of the software in place is not supported. As you can see, if you attempt to run the installer with Ibase 8.9.13 still installed, it will result in the following error being displayed. Uninstalling Ibase 8.9.13 may be different in your own environment depending on your own internal structure, but for this example, we simply navigate to Add Remove Programs under the Control panel and select Uninstall Ibase 8.9.13. Once the process is completed, then we can do a restart, and then we must also ensure that the following prerequisites are installed. First of all, we need to make sure that if we didn't have it installed already, we have the Microsoft SQL Server 2012 native client. Again, this may already have been installed if you were previously running 8.9.13, but if not, the installer will tell you that it is required. We also need to make sure that we have 2 versions of the .NET Framework installed. Specifically, we require .NET Framework version 3.5 Service Pack 1, and also .NET Framework version 4.7.2 to be installed at a minimum. Again, if these prerequisites are not found, the installer should fail and tell you that they have not been found. Once we have the prerequisites installed, we can then follow through with the steps to install Ibase 9. To do so, follow through with the on-screen instructions after double-clicking the setup.exe. Pay particular attention to the features which you wish to install, and note that some of these items are in fact chargeable components. so you must only install the features for which you are entitled. If you're making use of our Search 360 feature, the Tools section in this part of the install is what will install the updated Search 360 indexer. This will be important for those of you who may have your indexer installed in a separate location. Note that Ibase 9 databases can only be indexed by the Ibase 9 Search Indexer tool. So if your search indexer is installed in a separate location, you will need to install the tools component of the setup.exe to update the indexer specifically to be version 9. When you've selected all your appropriate features, click to install. Once the installation has completed, your next step is to upgrade the database to be a version 9 database. To do so, simply open Ibase Designer version 9. When the application loads, you must then log into the correct security file for your database and open each of your databases that you wish to be upgraded to be a version 9 database. When you do so, the client will tell you that it is about to, and will warn you that other users who are working with older client versions of Ibase will not be able to interact with this database once it has been upgraded. So it is important to make sure that once the upgrade is completed, all users are then upgraded to Ibase 9 for their client versions at the same time. Otherwise, they will no longer be able to work with the database. Once the databases have been opened and upgraded to version 9 databases, there are further steps required at this release to ensure that you are able to continue to work with the database if you are using or plan on using Search 360. At this release, Ibase is unable to correctly locate the search indexing jobs that you previously had configured for your database. To update an existing Search 360 indexing job, once the upgrade has been completed, you must then follow these steps. First, open the newly updated Ibase Index Service configuration tool. For each database you've previously had indexing configured for, simply select it in the list and click Configure. In the resulting window, check that the schedule still matches what you expected, and if it's correct, press Save. This will then update your index jobs to work with Ibase 9. You can then repeat this process for each database you have configured Search 360 to work with. There's also further steps to take for Search 360 which must be taken in order to continue indexing the contents of PDF documents. So if you do make heavy use of PDF document indexing, please pay particular attention here. At this release of Ibase, the product no longer uses or relies on Adobe 9 iFilters, which were previously required for indexing PDF documents. Ibase now relies on the default PDF filter handler built into Windows. Switching to this technology, however, is not as simple as just uninstalling the filter, as certain settings are not modified by the Adobe uninstaller when installing iFilter version 9. It's important to point out, before detailing the instructions, that if you're migrating to a new server instance that has never had the Adobe iFilter installed previously, you will not need to follow these instructions. Once you've migrated your database over to the new server, PDF documents should be supported and indexed out of the box as long as you enable the Windows Search Index. So, these instructions are only relevant to you if you're not planning on migrating currently. To work with PDF successfully in our case, we need to follow these instructions. First, we recommend that you back up your registry first before following any of these instructions. Instructions on how to do so can be found on the Microsoft website. Now, we must uninstall the Adobe iFilter using the Add Remove Programs functionality. Once the program has been uninstalled, we also need to remove the Adobe entry you will have in your system path environment variable. To do so, click Start and enter Environment. One of the options listed should be Edit the System Environment Variables. Click on the Environment Variables button. Use the second list of system variables and select Path from the list and select Edit. One of the options listed will be the path to your Adobe PDF iFilter. You must delete this variable from the list. Now we must modify the registry to set it back to the way it was before the iFilter was ever installed. To do this, open the registry editor by either pressing the Windows key and R together, or alternatively, open a Run dialog box. In the resulting Run dialog box, enter regedit, R-E-G-E-D-I-T, and press OK or Enter. When the registry loads, navigate through the registry structure to the hkey classes root /.pdf/key. We then need to create a new key named persistent handler. It's important to note at this point that if this key already exists, you have not uninstalled the Adobe iFilter. This must be completed before continuing, so uninstall the iFilter first and then return to the key. Once you have created the key with the name persistent handler, then change the data field of its default key to the original value contained within Windows. Obviously, me reading this out here is not very helpful, so the key data you need to enter is provided in the description box below. Once completed, exit the registry editor. Now go to Task Manager, and if necessary, click the More Details button. Then switch to the Services tab and select to restart the service wsearch. Note that if you can't restart wsearch, this means that the Windows indexing service has not been enabled, so to continue you must enable this first using Microsoft documentation. Once you've restarted the service, navigate to and open the Windows indexing options by typing indexing options into your Start search. To check that you are now configured to use original settings, scroll through the list to search for PDF. The filter description field should read Reader Search Handler if you were successful. You should also check that the PDF file type is also set to index both properties and file contents. Finally, reboot your system before continuing. When the system comes back up, you should also check that the PDF file type has been associated with an appropriate type of application that can open PDFs, for example Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. At this point, you should now be up and running with Ibase 9 in your current environment. If you're not migrating to a later version of Windows at this point, then you're done. However, if you are able to upgrade to a later supported version of Windows at this point via an existing upgrade deployment, you should also not need to make any changes to your deployment and can simply upgrade Windows in place. However, we will now be looking at the situation whereby you wish to migrate your Ibase 9 database from one machine to another. First, let's look at some of the fundamental things we'll need to do when considering migrating Ibase. The items that are most important for you to consider when you migrate are your SQL Server backup, the IDS security file, the IDB database file, and any archived audit log databases which you may wish to retain for future use. For this example, I'm going to show you how to migrate the database and the items which will be involved there. You may be aware that in the past, when dealing with migrations, we have suggested disabling Search 360 and suspending alerting before moving your database, and with this update we are still issuing the same advice. To temporarily suspend alerting, first open Ibase Designer and open your database. When the database loads, navigate to Tools, Feature Availability, Alerting Configuration. In the Alerting Configuration window, select Suspend Alerting. When you do, you'll see that the server and login credentials go from being grayed out to form fillable. This indicates that alerting has been suspended. If you were not to take this step prior to migration, when you migrated the database, the alerting information would still be pointing to your old database. If your old database is still available, this is not so much of a problem, as you can simply select Suspend Alerting post-migration, update the server credentials, and then continue. But if the old server has been decommissioned, clicking Suspend Alerting will fail, leaving you in a hung state. If this happens during your deployment, please get in contact with the support team. With alerting suspended, we should also temporarily disable Search 360. To do so, navigate to Tools, Search, Search 360 Administration. In the Search 360 Administration window, uncheck the Enable Search 360 tick box and click OK. This next step is very important. When you disable Search 360 and click OK, you will then be presented with a dialog box which will ask you if you want to remove your existing Search 360 index. If you have a very large database with lots of documents or items already indexed within it, it is important here to select No, as otherwise the existing Search 360 index will be deleted, needing you to then re-index your database again after it has been migrated. The good news here is that one of Ibase 9's performance improvements is around Search 360, so if you do accidentally remove the index and do not have a backup to restore from, hopefully the re-index time should be improved. Lastly, it's a good idea here to also make sure you note down your database password before migration of the database. Your database password can be found in the following location for each of the databases which you're intending on moving and in its associated security file. This is used in the situation where your new database cannot contact the old security database to authenticate that you are a sysadmin. To find the database password, open Ibase Designer and log in as a system administrator. Navigate to Tools, Feature Availability, and click Options. When the window loads, switch to the Advanced tab. Here you can copy the database password from the database password field. Make sure you store this somewhere sensible, such as somewhere that the new server will be able to reach. The database is now in a state where it's ready to be migrated. To start the migration, first ensure that all users are signed out and not using the product. There can be no users in the product when the migration occurs. This includes Ibase User, Ibase Designer, or any of the Ibase features when using Analyst Notebook. Next, use SQL Server Management Studio to back up your database chosen for migration. Here you can see I have my database listed along with an _sec and an _log database. It's important to understand what these databases are. Upsized Ibase databases will look different depending on how they are configured. If you've only upsized your database to SQL Server, then you will have a main database which takes the form of your database name with an underscore at the end. It may also have an associated _log database, which is your audit log database. If you've also upsized your security database to SQL Server, then you will also have an associated _sec database, which will be listed here. We must take backups of, at the least, the main data database and the associated _sec database if it is present. It's important to note as well that one security file can be associated with many different databases, so although you may not see an _sec database which matches your database's name, you may still need to take an _sec database with you during migration. Talk to your Ibase Designer administrator to know whether your Ibase security has been upsized. The _log database can optionally be left behind if the audit log data is no longer of interest to you. If so, Ibase will create a new _log database at startup once you've migrated the database. Otherwise, we will back that up to, restore that, and then Ibase will continue to append to the existing audit log database. To take backups in SQL Server Management Studio, use the following steps. First, log into SQL Server Management Studio as an administrator with the appropriate privileges. Once logged in, expand the database's folder structure in Object Explorer. For each of your databases, right-click the database and go to Tasks and select Backup. Select the database that you want to backup and then select Full as the backup type, ensuring that you have the database selected to backup, and select Disk as the location. Click OK to start the backup process. You then need to repeat the process for any associated sec or log databases. Once the backup is complete, you'll find a .back file created for each database you have taken a copy of. Copy those over to the new database location so you can restore them shortly. We suggest creating a new folder on the root of the disk called Ibase Backups or something familiar so that you can find it easily. Again, your DBA will be able to help you with this. Now let's take a look at the new system. This system is running Windows Server 2019 and has SQL Server 2019 installed onto it. I've already installed Ibase 9 using the instructions I previously described, and as mentioned earlier, I've not installed the PDF iFilter bump from Adobe. It's also important to point out that you will need to have configured your SQL Server for Search 360 before restoring your database, i.e. you will need to have enabled CLR or followed through the instructions which you can find in our Knowledge Center on enabling Search 360. The first thing we need to do to migrate onto this new system is restore our backups from our old database to the new one. To do so, open SQL Server Management Studio, and again, log into the database as an administrator with appropriate privileges. Again, in Object Explorer, expand Databases, and this time right-click the database folder, but this time select Restore Database. In the Restore Database wizard, we need to change to the Device Radio button, and then click the ellipse button in order to specify the database that we wish to restore from. On the Select Backup Devices screen, ensure File is selected as the backup media, and then click the Add button. Select your Ibase backup folder, and then select your database which you wish to back up first. For this example, I'm starting with my data database. Click OK once you have selected the database. Click OK to add the file. Under the Options tab, we need to select Overwrite the existing database. This shouldn't be necessary if you've never restored this database before, but if you have, this option is required, so it's easier to just always select this option. Press OK to perform the restore. Once the restore is complete, right-click the database and select Properties. In the resulting window, select the Options submenu, and then set the compatibility level to the latest SQL Server version. Here, I select SQL Server 2019. Repeat the previous step for the _sec databases and _log databases if appropriate. You've now restored the databases in SQL Server, but now we need to update Ibase and tell it to use the new database location rather than the old one. This process is done using the Ibase Database Configuration tool, which can be installed as part of the Tools feature of the installer. Let's open it up now. The tool allows us to take a specific set of IDS and IDB files and modify the location where the backend database is known to be stored by Ibase. The process of repointing a database is as follows. Note that these instructions are for the scenario where you're using an upsized security file. If your security file is not upsized, you should only need to repoint your IDB file. Also note you will need to have sysadmin privileges in order to follow these steps. First, we open the tool and locate our security file using the ellipsis button. For now, we leave the database file name field blank. Enter the username and password of the administrator user of your Ibase database. In my example here, I'm entering the sysadmin user and password. Here, you can see that when I click Next, my configuration utility fails to connect to the old SQL Server, as it is no longer available. It then prompts me for the database password for the security file so that I can prove that I have the security administrator permissions before it allows me to continue. This is the database password which we copied down earlier. Enter it here if you're prompted and click OK. If your database is still accessible from the new server, then the process is the same, but you won't be prompted for the database password. On the next screen, modify the server field to contain the name of the SQL server that you've just restored the security file to. Press Save. This then tells your Ibase IDS file to look at the new SQL server for security information. We then need to open the tool again, but this time we're going to enter both the IDS file and the IDB file together. If you followed the previous instructions correctly, you shouldn't need to worry about the database password this time. Follow through the instructions as before to point the IDB file to the new SQL Server and press Save. Note that you may be shown a couple of database services need to be shut down messages which you can OK. Once the files have been updated with the new location, you should then open the database in Ibase Designer. Once you've confirmed that Ibase Designer opens without issue, you should then update the location of the SQL Server in the alerting configuration we mentioned earlier. To do so, in Designer, go to Tools, Feature Availability, and back to Alerting Configuration. Modify the server name to be that of your new SQL Server, and then click Resume Alerting. This will then set alerting going again for your database, but obviously pointing at the new server. Similarly, we should re-enable the Search 360 feature. To do so, go to Tools, Search 360 Administration, and when the window loads, click the checkbox to enable Search 360 and then click OK. We then also need to make sure that we've set up the Search 360 indexer configuration for our new database to ensure that the indexer is set to run on a schedule appropriate for your environment. To do so, once again, open the Ibase Index Service Configuration tool, enter the instance name for your database if appropriate and provide your SQL Server login details, and press OK. For each database for which you wish Search 360 to be enabled for indexing, click Add and then add the relevant details for your database, including the server name, database name, and what sort of schedule you'd like the indexing to be run on. When done, click OK. Then repeat these steps for each of the databases you wish to index. At this point, you should successfully have migrated Ibase. You should then ensure that all of your client users' installations are all updated to Ibase version 9, again ensuring that Ibase 8.9.13 is uninstalled or any previous versions of Ibase are uninstalled before you let them back into the database. You do not need to update every client to Ibase 8.9.13 before installing Ibase 9, but any previous versions of 8.9 software must be uninstalled first. That concludes this guide. We hope it helps.